Hi, everybody. I just want to call out that's like probably the best pronunciation of my last name I've ever heard in public. In America, I've pretty much given up on anybody saying Hadžibović. So I'm here to talk to you about lean product development. More specifically, I'm going to go a little bit meta and talk about how you can use lean principles themselves to introduce lean practices to your organization. So just quick background, I'm director of product, so I'm really more on the product management side. I spent the first 7 or so years of my career at a company called The Ladders, which is relevant here only because it went through a few pretty drastic transformations. When I joined, it was a pretty hardcore waterfall company. And then we moved into agile development, which of course wreaked havoc for all other teams. So we started to wrap our heads around how to do agile UX and slowly evolved into a lean product development organization. Right now I'm at a company called OrderGrew, which is a B2B startup. So unsurprisingly, it was very sales driven at the beginning, but as we grow, we're trying to incorporate best practices when it comes to product development and design. We probably won't have time for questions, but my Twitter handle is up here, DZISHN, so feel free to tweet me or find me later if you want to talk about anything. I love to talk about my work. Before I get going, actually, let me just see, kind of raise your hands if you're familiar with lean startup, lean UX, like some permutation of like lean practices. All right, there's a decent number of hands up. One more. Thank you. OK, now, how many of you would you say that you're perhaps using some form of lean product development? Fewer hands up. OK. How many would you say have tried to introduce into your organization lean product practices? A few hands here and there. OK. So I don't know if you guys could see the rest of the, I guess depending on where you're sitting, you may have seen how many hands have gone up. But to me, this is sort of like a quantitative visual representation of my experience with lean, which is that, we hear a lot about it. And we go to, or speaking for myself, like I go to these conferences where somebody gets up on the stage and talks about how, lean is really, common sense packaged up into a book, and you got to talk to your customers, and you got to understand what their problems are, and form hypotheses, and build something small to validate your ideas, and then, if it's proven valuable, then really invest a lot in it and launch it to all your customers, right? And typically, of course, we like to get up and tell our success stories, right? So somebody's talking about how they really engaged the executive team and talked to all these different customers and learned things that they never could have guessed, and it's all very exciting. In fact, there's a company called Lean Startup Machine in the US, and true to their name, they practice and teach lean startup practices. One of their big things is fail fast, fail often, so that you can more quickly get to the thing that's right. They started printing these stickers that I started seeing at conferences that say, what took you 6 months took me 3 days. I remember seeing this sticker for the first time and going, what? Where's my 5 months and 27 days to take back? Where's 5 months and 27 days of every members of my team's lives that I could maybe give back if I could figure out what the hell are they doing? It really made me look at, how my organization was working and think about, what are we doing wrong, Because again, you hear all these amazing stories of success, and it really sounds like common sense. Talk to customers, figure out what they need, and then go build that, and then sell it back to them, right? But as uplifted as I leave the conference, by the time Monday rolls around and I'm back at my job, between the client meeting in the afternoon and the wireframes that are due on Tuesday and the next project kickoff on Wednesday, the very idea of introducing lean product development feels like I'm picking up this boulder and like Sisyphus trying to drive it up a mountain. And not only is this boulder massive, but it's increasingly starting to feel like it's only going to work for spherical cows in a vacuum. Like it'll only work on paper, only in theory, only on the stage of a conference. Like I don't know how to bring it into my actual day-to-day reality. So in one of my more exasperated moments, I went back to basics, and I went back to a book called Lean UX, written by Jeff Gothelf and Josh Sadin. and specifically a quote in which they try to articulate what's really the core idea of Lean UX. So Lean UX is the practice of bringing the true nature of a product to light faster in a collaborative and cross-functional way that reduce the emphasis on thorough documentation while increasing the focus on building a shared understanding of the actual product experience being designed. So, as promised, I started to go meta on this. How can I take Lean and fold it in on itself? How can I take this very idea of the right way to build products and apply it to the right way to build processes in my company? I started to sort of mentally adjust this quote to say, well, maybe Lean is the practice of bringing the true nature of a process to light faster. Still definitely collaborative and cross-functional. Definitely reduced emphasis on any specific steps that may have worked for other teams. But increase, rather, the shared understanding of that work experience that we're trying to create. And most importantly, by the effectiveness of that work experience. So I need you to kind of go with me on three things here that underpin the rest of my talk. One is I started thinking about my team as my own customers. And the product that I was building was a teamwork experience. How do we work together, right? And why, right? You need a vision, because whether you're being lean or agile or not, none of it is an excuse for lack of a vision. So my vision was pretty simple. I just want our team to build stuff that matters. I don't want to work under great stress on these death marches to seemingly arbitrary deadlines only to build something and release it and then see nobody use it. Right? That's what I didn't want. I just wanted us to build stuff that matters. And I wanted to stick again to those basic principles of identify a problem, come up with a hypothesis and an experiment that'll help you figure out whether your hypothesis was valid or not, see what happens, measure, and then adapt accordingly. In Lean Startup, Eric Ries talks about, persevere or pivot, right? But more broadly, just adapt your approach. So the three stories I want to tell you is, again, how can you, in a very lean and light-handed way, start to introduce some practices that are very important to building the right product. One is set KPIs, or just metrics. Another is vetting assumptions about our ideas. We as humans are great at convincing ourselves that our idea is brilliant. We're also great at finding like-minded people who will agree with us. My neighbor Josh, he loves all of my ideas. If he were my customer, I'd be killing it. But how do we actually vet assumptions better as an organization? And then more broadly, sort of how do we experiment with new approaches, which I think Lean and continuously building the right product is going to demand of us. So we're going to start with the easy one. So you might be experiencing this problem. You've built something, you released it. Did it do anything? Did it work? Was it worth your time? So sometimes, I know in the past, I found myself in situations where I felt like I couldn't measure the impact of our work. So I couldn't really tell if it was or wasn't valuable. So my hypothesis is simple. If we set clear KPIs, then we'll be able to measure the impact. We'll see if the KPI went up or didn't. Now, the important thing here, and the sort of the lean thing about it is, don't fret who needs to set KPIs. Don't even fret what the KPI is. Just demonstrate the practice. Just set a KPI. And ideally, make it very simple, something that the whole organization can understand, whether they're in product, tech, sales, marketing, wherever, finance. Number of customers who care. Sure. Pick a number, and then start talking about it, and start talking about when it goes up, and start talking about it when it goes down. Now, the organization will respond in one of three ways. One is, nobody notices. Nobody says anything. OK, maybe there wasn't an important problem to solve, or maybe they're just not ready to think about it that way. They can also ask you about it. They ask you about it, and they say, like, yeah, that's a really good idea. We should measure how many customers care. That's a great KPI. Great, now you have a KPI. And the third thing that can happen is they start to talk to you about it, but they're like, number of customers who care, like, that's really vague. How do you really measure that? Let's talk about setting a better KPI. So in terms of judging the success of an experiment like this, I would say that 2 out of 3 scenarios here are success, because what you've achieved is that now you have your team collaborating on understanding what is a good way to measure your product, and you're figuring it out. Okay, let's pick a hairier one. So it's pretty sad how many times I've heard people say this. We always abandon projects before we really get to finish them. And all the good stuff, all the value is pushed off into this infamous phase 2 that we don't know when it is, but we know that it's after this deadline that is looming right now. Now, it's easy to gripe about this, and I think we all sometimes do. But let's challenge ourselves to see if we can change it. So what I want to put out there is that if the MVP we built, and I use MVP here loosely, V1, first iteration, whatever you want to call it, right? The first stab at the product. If the MVP were smaller, so we could build it faster, and if we were testing the right assumptions about the value of the idea, then the team should be able to get buy-in to persevere because we're showing some success, or we ourselves will see that this is not a good idea and we will happily drop it. Now, the biggest challenge here is, well, how do you make that MVP, that V1, how do you make it small, and how do you make sure that it's testing the right assumption about the value? In an ideal world, what we're doing is, sorry, my bad. So first of all, MVP might be an idea that your company is or isn't familiar with. This is a graphic that I've seen on so many blog posts, I unfortunately no longer know who to attribute it to. But I found it very effective at describing what an MVP is and how it's different than how we classically build products. So the top way is, you want to build a car, you're very excited about it. The primary concern is, can we be efficient in building it? So you got a team building wheels, you got a team building chassis, somebody's assembling it all together, and voila, car, right? And what sucks about that is that throughout, your customer is getting nothing from you. And in the end, they get a car. And luckily, in this drawing, they're excited about that. But they could have just as likely been, very blasé and nonplussed that you built them a car, because that's not what they needed in their lives. The bottom approach is a little bit more like, okay, well, instead of building a car, why don't we start with a skateboard that's really quick and light, and we can get it out the door quickly. And then if people like it, they can tell us, I like it, but if only it had a seat, and you can kind of work your way up to a bike and motorbike, and eventually you build a car. And the great thing about that process is you're constantly delivering value to your customer, or at least a segment of your customers. And you're constantly validating that you should continue to invest, right? Because there isn't a picture after the car, right? At the car, we've sufficiently met our customers' needs that there was no point in investing further, right? There's diminishing return on investment past that point. Now, as effective as I find this image in teaching people what an MVP is, I also find it to be showing deceptively, it makes MVPs seem deceptively simple to design. And that's because you get to look at this bottom row and you see these 5 objects and you say, well, what do they all have in common, right? It's not comfy seats. It's not that you can play music while you're using them. It's not that they have air conditioner. The one thing that they all have in common is that they get me from point A to point B faster than I would get there if I were simply walking, right? That's it. So it's easy to say, oh, aha, I get it, right? The customer need was that they need to get places faster, and so you built the smallest thing, the skateboard, that meets that need. And that's ideally how we work, right? We understand a set of customer needs, maybe we hash them against our business goals, right? Is this gonna help the company grow? And then we create a bunch of ideas, and we test them, and we figure out which one works best. But in reality, you typically have somebody on your team, a developer, a sales guy, your CEO, the founder of the company, whoever, right? Somebody's coming to you and saying, I have a great idea. Okay, let's work with that, right? Let's not stress that we didn't start from a customer need. Let's take the idea and moonwalk our way back into what are our assumptions about the customer needs that would have to be true for that idea to really be as cool as you're making it sound. So when somebody comes and says, hey, we should build a car, start asking lots of questions. And I mean beyond the 5 whys, right? Because asking why repeatedly, you get to a point where people don't really know what to tell you anymore. You need to ask them questions that they know how to answer. So, okay, how would customers use this? What would they achieve? Why is that important to them? What have they said to make you believe that? How many said that? Can you put me in touch with any of those? And then, of course, let's not forget our own business needs, right? So let's say that you're sensing a legitimate customer need. If we solve for that need, what will it do for us? Is that something that we need to accomplish right now, or can we delay it? Time is really of the essence here. And then if you're finding yourself really seriously considering doing it, I found two questions especially helpful, even though they're kind of negatively framed. One is, what happens if we don't do it? And the competition will build it is not a helpful answer. So you need to somehow push past that. But what you're looking for is the customer pain that will continue to happen, or a business threat that you will incur if you don't solve this problem. And the other question is, how could we screw it up? So we spend a lot of time talking about what success looks like. I often find it more helpful to talk about what failure looks like, because that's where, in the middle of a conversation where my CEO is telling me how the car needs to have 4 wheels, comfy seats, play music, a rearview mirror in the middle, and 2 on the side, and I'm furiously taking notes, figuring I'll have to puzzle out later what matters. When I ask, how could we screw it up, that's where you get the answer of, imagine if we build a car and it doesn't even move. And that's where you get to the key features. So again, 3 things can happen. They talk themselves out of the idea, they help you ask these questions, or they help you get the answers. 2 out of 3, we have a success. We have an organizational success. It can generally be hard to try new practices sometimes because you'll hear people do things a certain way because that's how we've always done them. Well, I want to challenge us to articulate the problem instead of dictating the solution. That's something that we often ask of our business owners. Don't bring me the idea, bring me the problem, right? But I think we need to do the same thing. So while we know why we need to do user research, why don't we say, look, we just don't know how to prioritize all these features. We can't build them all. And we really want to figure out what resonates with customers before we decide where we're going to spend our money. That's a reasonable statement. Instead of venting about the deadlines that you have, maybe acknowledge them. I don't have the power in the organization to change deadlines, not always. And as soon as I acknowledge that, the developers appreciate my honesty and jump to my aid to figure out, well, how do we build something useful with the time we have? Even something as simple as, my usability testing sucks because I'm using QA website and the data's rubbish. Somebody will find a way to help you. So being lean is hard. That's definitely my experience, and I've heard it echoes in conversations with some people. But I think that if we articulate the problem we're trying to solve, and we demonstrate the first experiment, an example of a process, then people will join us in learning how to make our work more valuable. Or as I like to say in French, people will join us and do epic shit. That's it from me. We do actually have like 1:40 to spare. I don't know if that might be too short for questions. If there's an urgent question on anybody's mind, let's address it, but otherwise I'll hand it off. Awesome. Thank you all.